Ex-law enforcement and author of the Missing 411 series, David Paulides, alongside his CanAm Missing team, have investigated thousands of unusual disappearances throughout the national parks of America. These disappearances generally hold some eerily similar qualities and coincidences that you may not expect. Paulides himself was first approached by two off-duty park rangers who led him down a strange rabbit hole of people seeming to vanish into thin air throughout the national park system. Now, all of the disappearances you will learn about throughout this video took place in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. You will find links to all of the sources used throughout this video in the description below. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park is the most popular national park in the United States by far, hosting well over 10 million people annually. According to the National Park Service, the Great Smoky Mountains gets more annual visitors than the Grand Canyon, Yosemite, and Yellowstone combined. The park itself was established in 1934 and is comprised of ridge upon ridge of seemingly endless forest on the border between North Carolina and Tennessee. It's called the Smokies due to the often present fog that hangs over the range and looks like large smoke plumes from a distance. This national park has been the home to some incredibly strange disappearances, often leading the park rangers and law enforcement alike to display some level of confusion, and is precisely where this first disappearance took place. This incident demonstrates the danger and trouble a group disintegrating can cause. 21-year-old Mark Hanson from Newport, Kentucky, alongside Ben Fish and John Chidester, who were both from Prestonburg, Kentucky, made the trip to hike on the Appalachian Trail. The three men were intelligent individuals and students from the Eastern Kentucky State University. They were good friends and wanted to spend some time together during their spring break that year. Their plan was simple: to begin their hike up the Appalachian Trail at the Big Creek Ranger Station at the east end of the park. From there, they would hike approximately 16 miles to the Tri-Corner Knob Shelter. This is a journey that would prove to be a good challenge for most, as the route in question requires a climb of over 4,600 feet over its course. While the group were aware that the weather was going to be bad, they certainly weren't prepared for just how bad it actually got. The three men set off on their hike on the 9th of March 1975, and as often is the case, the weather had been particularly terrible at that time of the year. The days preceding the trip saw flooding rains at lower elevations and heavy snow at higher elevations, and in the early hours of the 9th, a tornado had touched down in the park. Despite this, the three men continued on with their plans, but unfortunately, they were not appropriately equipped for this hike. At the time, they didn't have waterproof jackets and were wearing cotton, which lacks the ability to block the wind, unlike wool, which could have made all the difference. Shortly after the group left the trailhead, the weather took a turn for the worst. The wind picked up speed and it began to snow heavily. Somewhere between Low Gap and the Cosby Knob Trail Shelter, John had enough. John told the others that he was drenched, cold, and didn't think he possessed the ability to make it all the way under the conditions present. So he turned around and headed back to the car. Approximately 1 mile from the point where John turned back, Mark and Ben continued on and passed the shelter at Cosby Knob. It was at this point that their journey began to get increasingly dangerous. The remaining two were still facing an incredibly challenging uphill battle, literally. The men were still hiking uphill, daylight was running out fast, and the wind and snow were still hitting them hard. At this point, they had managed to make it to Camel Gap, but this was only around halfway to their intended destination at Tri-Corner. Cosby Knob and its warm shelter was much closer, but the pair didn't want to turn back and give up the ground they had covered, so they continued on. It's important to note that the men were in good physical condition and would be considered fit by anyone's definition, but at this point in the hike they were completely spent. They had no energy left and still had miles upon miles to go uphill. This was no easy task, and especially in the weather conditions present, this was a perilous situation to be in. It's at this point that Mark was showing clear signs of hypothermia while Ben was handling the weather better. Mark told Ben that his backpack was too heavy and it was slowing him down, so he dropped it on the trail. Ben did fight and made the case that it was vital that he picked it back up and continued on with it. But it was too late. Mark was no longer thinking rationally and had made his decision. They continued on and made it to Mount Gio at 7 p.m. Ben was still taking point and encouraged Mark to carry on the pace, which he somehow managed to do for another hour and a half. At 8:30 p.m, the men were surrounded by total darkness, the temperature was plummeting further and the snow was still falling hard. Mark was shivering badly at this point and told Ben that he couldn't go on any further and dropped to the floor. Ben tried his best to get him up, but Mark couldn't. Ben travelled another 200 yards desperately hoping to come across help, but ultimately realised that he too couldn't make it any further and got in his sleeping bag. Unfortunately for the pair, they didn't know that the shelter at Tri-Corner was just another 200 yards away from Ben. Ben was obviously feeling the effects of the weather and exhaustion as he recalled either dreaming or actually hearing Mark shouting for help. Ben got up at 7 a.m. the following morning and went to locate Mark, but he wasn't there. No tracks could be seen and several inches of snow laid on the ground. Ben then made his way to Tri-Corner alone for help. Ben managed to find help and the search began, though they couldn't locate a single trace of Mark anywhere. After this search failed, Ben called the National Park Service and Mark was reported missing. On the 11th, searchers found Mark's backpack in the same location he had set it down undisturbed. They also thoroughly combed the area he was last seen but couldn't locate any evidence of his presence. The 12th of March would see search and rescue numbers swell and the area was scoured alongside nearby caves, but nothing was found. The search escalated over the next week and grid searches continued, supported by helicopters and dogs. Mark's body was eventually found on March the 17th at 2 p.m. According to David Paulides, Mark was located 2 miles down Buckfort Creek from the Appalachian Trail. Searchers found Mark leaning against a tree, his parka open and his gloves and boots lying nearby in the snow. Mark was carried to a helo site where he was airlifted out of the park. Paulides goes on to note that it is highly unusual that given Mark's exhaustion that he managed to travel a further 2 miles to the point he was located. David also notes that it is strange that Mark didn't have his shoes or gloves on when he was found. While I do agree that the circumstances are unusual in the terms of distance travelled, I do have some criticism for David's reporting of this case. Not once did he mention that Mark either was or could have been suffering from hypothermia, which honestly, the signs were there and is completely rational in this case given the low temperature, clothing worn and harsh weather conditions at the time. This could be a possible explanation as to why the parka was open and the clothing items came off. For those that don't know, this paradoxical undressing is caused by the later stages of hypothermia where the person will start to remove clothing as their blood vessels swell and tighten, which makes them feel irrationally hot when in reality this is obviously not the case. Again, while I do see David's point about travelling a further 2 miles off trail being somewhat strange, I feel the possibility and likelihood of suffering from hypothermia and its effects on a rational thinker simply should have been mentioned in this instance. Ultimately, even if this doesn't account for everything, I don't know why this omission of information occurred here. Speaking of accounting for everything, something that I couldn't find much information on was the origin of Mark's cry for help. It remains a mystery as to whether Ben actually heard this or if it was simply a dream, he's just not sure. But if it was real, what caused it? Could that point to something untoward taking place? However, it's important to note that they never found any evidence of foul play or any sort of struggle. If the scream was real, we may be missing a vital key to the puzzle in this incident. And given that Mark was exhausted and couldn't move earlier when Ben tried to get him up off the floor, it certainly is strange that he somehow managed to travel another 2 miles thereafter. Could this indicate that he was moved there somehow? Although as mentioned, there was no sign of a struggle taking place. It's unlikely that we will ever know for sure what exactly happened to Mark Hanson, but it remains highly unusual. Anyway, moving on, let's explore another unusual disappearance in the Great Smoky Mountains. I'm not sure if David Paulides has personally spoken about this incident, but many online sources have. Susan, a mother of 3, often called Mitzi by her friends and loved ones, was 53 at the time of her disappearance. Susan went missing while hiking with her 20-year-old daughter on September the 25th, 2018. On this particular day, Susan and her daughter were hiking near Clements Dome in the Great Smoky Mountains. Susan disappeared at approximately 5 p.m. on the day in question, very close to the parking lot. The women were about a quarter of a mile away from Andrews Bald on the Thorny Ridge Trail when her daughter made the decision to hike ahead a short distance with the intention of turning around and meeting back up at the parking lot. Susan's daughter wanted to make the climb up to the Clements Dome observation tower. This is a climb of over 6,600 feet, a climb that Susan didn't want to do and agreed to meet up at the parking lot. It's unclear precisely how long the pair were separated for, but it's thought that it wasn't a significant amount of time. When the daughter arrived back at the parking lot, she couldn't find her mother anywhere. Initially, not thinking much of it, she waited around for a while and then retraced her steps back onto the trail, but couldn't find a trace of Susan. A couple of hours had passed now and she began to panic and contacted the park authorities. The park authorities conducted their own search around the area in question, but soon contacted outside help. 175 trained searchers with drones, sniffer dogs, and helicopters from 50 search and rescue organizations helped park staff in the large-scale search of the area, but nothing was found. Unfortunately, however, the search was made more difficult as a result of the weather conditions at the time. Fogs flooded the forest along with rain, making visibility very limited. Temperatures also dropped to the low 40s, which is essentially single digits for those more familiar with Celsius. The weather made it very difficult to coordinate the search effectively, especially since it was accompanied by lack of phone coverage in the area. In response to this, Verizon stepped up and deployed a portable cell tower in the area to assist with the organisation of the search efforts. At this point, it was now the 1st of October and the searchers had hiked their grid search over 500 miles on and off trail. This is an incredibly rugged area and searchers were left baffled that they couldn't find a single trace of her anywhere, given the significant resources poured into the search. On an interesting side note, Susan's disappearance took place in very close proximity to that of Trenny Lynn Gibson, who disappeared in 1976. I'll link that video at the top of this one now, but I'll also put it in the description below if you want to learn more. Susan's disappearance was deemed very strange as it seemed to have happened very quickly and no evidence was left behind. No signs of a struggle, ripped clothing, or anything of that nature. The area in question was close to the parking lot and was well signposted. It's hard to believe that she had simply gotten lost and left the trail. Susan's body was found late the following night on the 2nd. The CitizenTimes.com reported, "The search for Clements lasted a week and involved 175 trained personnel from 5 states and some 50 organizations, helicopters, drones, and canine units. It ended when her body was found the night of October the 2nd in incredibly thick vegetation down the steep Huggins Creek drainage in Swain County, 2 miles west of the Clements Dome parking lot, and 3/4 of a mile south of the Appalachian Trail. There was no foul play suspected." According to an autopsy report, Susan had passed away as a result of hypothermia. Given the low temperatures and weather conditions at the time, hypothermia is a likely consequence given that the pair only intended a day's hike and weren't carrying supplies or heavyweight clothing. However, while this may be true, if reports are to be believed that the area is well signposted, why did Susan travel 2 miles west from the parking lot? Was her rationale broken to the point of absolute confusion, or did something else take place here? Was she somehow prevented from going further towards the parking lot? It's unclear and remains a very strange disappearance. What happened to Susan Clements? 13-year-old Brad Levy was spending the day with his parents, Randy and Nancy, and some of their friends at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park on the 28th of March, 1993. Brad's parents had decided that they wanted to travel to Rainbow Falls, located on Mount LeConte Trail. As the name might suggest, Rainbow Falls is an absolutely breathtaking waterfall sitting at an elevation of 3,200 feet, or roughly just half of the 6,600 foot Mount LeConte it resides on. The family and friends were having a great day hiking together, but things would take a turn for the worst at some point during the late afternoon. It's not clear exactly how or where this took place, but at some point during the hike, Brad must have become separated from the rest of the group as he was no longer with them. The group never heard any thumps indicating a fall or any noise to suggest that something was wrong, no screams or calls for help. I've read a couple of reports of this incident, and all of them, including David Paulides', state that the trail is clearly marked, making the fact that Brad had somehow disappeared even stranger. The parents began to panic, and alongside the others in the group, they began to search their immediate area and also retrace their steps, hoping to recover their son. But this wouldn't be the case. In fact, they couldn't find a single trace of Brad, so abandoned the search and went back down the mountain to alert the authorities. The search for Brad was massive, and the individuals tasked with finding him arrived in force. Armed forces from Fort Campbell, Kentucky arrived on scene along with 5 helicopters, each equipped with infrared sensors. The search also managed to attract the attention of 150 backcountry experts who joined the search. On the 2nd of April, 1993, the Times Daily reported, "The primary search area is only about a half-mile wide and 2.5 miles long. The search has been underway since shortly after Brad's disappearance on Sunday." This search area indicates that the National Park Service, alongside other experts, agreed that Brad must have been located within that area as he couldn't have travelled very far given the terrain. At this point, it's important to reiterate that the group's goal was to reach Rainbow Falls at a 3,200 foot elevation, whereas Brad went missing at a roughly 3,000 foot elevation. The search escalated over the duration of the search as more and more people began to hear about the event and volunteered to assist. Brad's body was found on day 6 of the search, and he was located in a steep and rugged area around half a mile away from the Rainbow Falls Trail. 2 days after their initial article, the Times Daily reported on the 4th. A National Park Service official said that the boy's body was found by a park volunteer and a co-worker of Randy Levy's. The discovery was made at the base of an unnamed 80 to 100 foot waterfall on a tributary of LeConte Creek about 2,000 feet off the Rainbow Falls Trail. Searchers said that they were surprised at how far and how high the boy had travelled. He was found at the upper limits that we searched at about 4,800 feet. The area is so steep and so thicketed that the possibility of him going that far was something that surprised everyone. This took them by surprise for good reason. This means that what is being suggested is that Brad climbed another 1,600 feet by himself after he had gotten lost. Brad's family didn't know how to take this information and also expressed confusion as they didn't believe that he would have made it uphill that far given the rugged terrain. The family ended up refusing to visit the body as they said that the trip to it was incredibly dangerous and difficult. So this begs the question of how Brad managed to get to that location in the first place. Young people generally travel downhill, not uphill when they are lost, as it is far easier to do so. Park officials conducted an investigation on the scene, and the body was there for quite some time before being moved. Paulides went on and stressed the point that because the body hadn't been moved, he felt that the Park Service must have found something unusual in the area or at the bottom of the waterfall. Ultimately, the park officials stated that the cause of passing was as a result of head trauma. This was confirmed by Lisa McNeil, a spokeswoman for the University of Tennessee Medical Center, who had this to say: "The boy passed from a massive head injury and multiple traumas. No autopsy was performed. A visual inspection was declared satisfactory by doctors to pronounce the cause." Generally speaking, when an incident such as this occurs, an autopsy is conducted in order to ensure that foul play can be completely ruled out. Something doesn't quite add up in this instance. In the end, Brad passed away under highly unusual circumstances. How did he get lost, and why did he travel uphill? Why was an autopsy not considered appropriate here? Again, no one present heard or saw anything to indicate that anything was wrong. And yet Brad went missing on a clearly marked trail right under the noses of his family and friends. What happened to Brad Levy's? Velma Pauline Melton, often called Polly by her friends and loved ones, 58 years of age at the time of her disappearance, went on a hiking trip with her husband Bob and two of her close friends in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. On the 25th of September 1981, they were on the Deep Creek Trail nearby the campground in the park. The trail in question is fairly easy and isn't very strenuous on the body. Velma had been hiking this trail for 20 years and as a result was very familiar with the route. Before we get into what happened, it's important to note that Bob was much older than Velma at 78 years. And on the day in question, Bob was tired and wanted to sit the hike out as his health didn't really allow for much walking. So Bob stayed inside their Airstream trailer while Velma and her two friends went out on a leisurely hike along her familiar trail. The ladies were having a great time together, but it's at this point that things get bizarre. Velma wanted to pick up the pace and walk just ahead of her two friends and walked over a small hill and briefly out of line of sight of the other two. As her friends walked over the same hill, they said that Velma was nowhere to be seen. The friends said that it was strange, but thought that she may have just picked up the pace again and would see each other back at the trailer. They made it back to the trailer at 4:30 PM, but Velma wasn't there, and Bob said that he hadn't seen her since they all left together. At this stage, it's important to note that the friends never heard anything out of the ordinary or anything to suggest that something was wrong. Velma's friends went back to the area in question and began to search, but unfortunately couldn't find anything to suggest which direction Velma may have gone. She was reported missing at 6 PM that evening, and a much larger search effort was soon underway. According to unsolvedappalachia.org, over the course of that week, over 150 people searched for Polly, as well as 9 search dogs. At one point, a dog was alerted to a tree that was downed, and searchers believe that she may have stopped to rest there for a moment. They didn't pick up on her scent at any other locations. Not so much as a trace of Polly was found. The idea of someone taking Velma was explored by detectives, but they came to the conclusion that this was highly unlikely. Velma was almost 6 feet tall and weighed around 180 pounds, which is why they deemed this event as unlikely. Or at the very least, some evidence of this should have been left behind, but there was none to be found. In fact, no trace of Velma has ever been found, there were no tracks, the dogs never picked up her scent again, and it's unclear what happened. Could Velma have vanished intentionally? This was a possibility that was questioned, but no evidence of this was ever found. Whatever happened to Velma must have happened very quickly. As soon as she passed over that small hill, she was never seen again. Animal predation would have been obvious as there is generally a scatter left behind, but in this case, nothing. I'd love to hear your thoughts in regards to this incident and all cases mentioned throughout this video. Do let me know your thoughts. Please do leave a like if you liked this video or a dislike if you didn't. Feel free to share your honest opinion. I'd like to hear your thoughts. And I'd just like to take a moment to thank all of you that have subscribed to the channel and who share these videos. I appreciate it a lot and I can't thank you enough. I'd also like to say a massive thank you to my patrons who make these videos possible, so thank you very much to all who've signed up. Anyway, do let me know what you thought of this one and you'll find all of the sources and links in the description below. As always, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already, it helps me a lot. I hope that you have a great day or evening depending on where you are. Be safe guys, and I'll catch you soon. Peace.